Well, howdy, folks, and welcome to another rootin' tootin' edition of Theology Thursday. I am Pastor James Smith of St. John's Lutheran Three Rivers and Trinity Episcopal Three Rivers, joined as always by my partner, Pastor Chris Laughlin from Messiah Lutheran Constantine. How are you doing today?
You know, I'm so much better than I was last week.
Yes, for our viewers out there who may be confused and say, these were recorded in the same day. You can't have Theology Thursday twice in one day. All I have to say is clearly they were not recorded in the same day, because was I wearing this hat in the last episode? Answer, no. So today we are discussing saving communion from the magicians. Donatism, Eutychianism, and Nestorianism. And Pastor Laughlin, could you please explain to us the principles of Donatism, other than don't do it or you're going to be a heretic?
So Donatus was a bishop in North Africa in, I think, the 3rd century, so in the 200s. And contrary to popular belief, the Roman Empire did not consistently persecute Christians heavily throughout the entire pre-Constantinian era, right? There were times and places when Christianity was pretty heavily persecuted, and large stretches of time when Christianity was technically illegal, but nobody really cared as long as Christians kept their heads down. Well, Donatus was a bishop during a time and a place that was some pretty heavy persecution. Yep. And priests were turning tail and going yellow-bellied, trying to keep up with your hat there, Pastor James.
Yeah.
And they were renouncing the faith. And Donatus said that those cowards were unworthy of being priests, and because they were renouncing the faith, that nothing they had done, their ordinations were invalid, and all the sacraments they administered were invalid. All communions, all baptisms, all confirmations, because those were not real priests.
Can I use a U.S. history analogy for both out there? So it's almost like after the Civil War, when the United States has to determine who we're going to let participate in American civil life again among the traitors, and kind of to what level, and so that's kind of, do you have to swear an oath or whatever, and that's kind of a situation, I'd say, similar to what Donatus is trying to sort out, is should these people who just betrayed us basically by, again, like you said, turning tail, and I'm not trying to be negative, because who knows what we would have done in their shoes, but who did not remain true to the faith, under what grounds should they be accepted back? And Donatus was basically like, they shouldn't, which is actually, I believe there's a line in Hebrews that kind of talks about this, that the idea is once you have come to faith and then drifted away, you can't just come back again. You're pretty much done at that point.
At the same time, I think when the church denounces Donatism, it turns to the example of Peter, right? Who...
I'm not agreeing with Donatus, by the way. I'm just saying, like, and you have to think of it from his perspective. He probably knew lots of priests with him who, at great risk, stayed true to the faith, so there's kind of that. And of course, I'm sure there were others who were not threatened, and it was easy to, from the peanut gallery to say, "Luca, can you believe they did?" And it's like, well, you did the same thing. You don't know. But what I'm saying is there were at least some good reasons, both from Scripture and from their lived experience of, really, their ordination is still as good as mine, even though I, like some of my fellow priests who were persecuted, I'm willing to risk life and limb for the faith, and they're willing to do just what they're told, and we're the same. Really?
Kind of like What do you mean those people, got here and worked the last hour of the day when I bore the heat and the sun, and we're going to get paid the same?
Yeah.
Really? So go ahead.
I think we need to save some space for righteous and self-interested anger. Just to acknowledge, maybe it's not a good thing, but that it does exist. Like, that parable, the master never says you have to be happy for them or like what they did. It's just, don't begrudge me for doing what's with mine. And maybe a message from that time is, even if we don't like what some other pastors are doing with their own or what some other churches are doing, it doesn't mean that God has left the building.
If I have taken nothing away from the last 4 or 5 months, whatever it's been now, 4 or 5 years, 4 or 5 eternities, sometimes it feels like, it's that I'm done. There's a left and right limit still, obviously, but other congregations are going to do what they're going to do. We're going to do what we're going to do, and I'm done judging them.
Right.
They got to make the best decisions for them and their community and their time and place.
Right.
But Donatists didn't have that kind of compassion, right? And it's easy for us, 1,800 years later, sitting here comfortably in North America at our computers, pontificating about, Donatists should have been more compassionate. I have not lived through persecutions like that.
Yeah.
At the same time, the church decided Donatist was wrong. And I would argue that Donatist is still alive and well in the church today.
Pray tell.
Anytime somebody says, well, the pastor hurt me, so I'm taking it out on the church or God, that smacks of Donatism to me.
That's complicated, because I think what Donatists would say is just that pastor presided at a communion. You can go up, but you're eating wafers and grape juice, and that's it.
But that still removes God from the equation, right? Like, God was never a part of the sacrament. The sacrament is efficacious because of the priest and not because of God.
Right. But I think we have to deal with the fact that there are pastors and priests, and you can fill in the blanks, who have done terrible things. And I don't think holding a grudge against that pastor or priest is Donatism. I think what would be Donatism is if you would say, not really the body and blood of Christ, or you're not really baptized when that pastor or priest performs the sacrament.
Or staying in your pew and not receiving the sacraments because you don't like that pastor or priest.
Yeah. Maybe it is Donatism of a higher order, or second order.
Or a different order at least.
Right. I think, yeah. I want to be careful, again, because I think we do need to leave space for pastoral mismanagement, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I'll just name it, especially. I keep coming back to the child abuse scandal, which is not just the Roman Catholic Church, but it's
everywhere.
It's particularly located in there as it's been exposed. But yeah, it is everywhere. I think we need to say that, what they did was evil. But I think what the Christian church would say in response to the Donatist argument of, well, I can't trust anything he does, is you are making the sacrament too much about him.
Bingo.
And yeah. And so the sacrament, the priest or the pastor is appointed to fulfill a practical role, which is literally, saying the proper prayers, deciding who's in good standing with the church to come up and receive it. Someone in the community has agreed, has permission, has license to do this, done collectively, usually at a greater higher up level, with more of the church involved than just the local congregation. But what makes that sacrament valid is Christ's action when he says, "Do this in remembrance of me," or when he says, "Go and baptize." And that's lived out not by a priest or a pastor saying these words to himself, but by the congregation coming out together and enacting those words and promises of Christ.
Well, and it's God. Ultimately, the sacraments are God's actions, not the priests.
Exactly.
Well said, Pastor James. At the same time, or perhaps in a different way, the Nestorians and the Eutychians, or however you're supposed to say it, Eutychians? Is that Eutychians?
I've always said Eutychians.
Eutychians, okay.
Honestly, these are not English words. They're from Greek, so.
Well, Nestorius was a guy, and I'll get this out there. There have been
was a guy as well.
Say again?
Eutyches was a human being as well.
Oh, fair enough. So there are people today, historians today, who defend Nestorius who, and delineate between Nestorius and Nestorians, that Nestorians may have been misrepresenting Nestorius. I don't see the need to defend the guy. But also, he wasn't my buddy. So if they were attacking you, Pastor James, I would defend you.
Yeah. Would you tear Nestorius' statue down or not? That's the question everyone wants to know. I would.
But that's for a future edition of Theology Thursday.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we're doing iconoclasm.
Iconoclasm and the iconoclast controversy, yes.
Which will literally not be today.
That will probably literally be next week.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, you were talking about Nestorius.
Yeah, I mean, so it's hard for some of these individuals because most of what we get comes from their opponents and not directly from their mouths or pens.
Right. Do you remember all the way back to last week we talked about the Pneumatologians?
Yes, I remember that we were talking about them.
And I said, if I remember my words from last week, they're often named, these heresies are often named by their opponents. And that's the way you have to think about it. Nestorius thought he was a faithful, good Catholic Christian, and they said you're wrong. And anyone who follows, you are being Nestorius. You're representing yourself. And anyone who falls into this trap and agrees with you really doesn't believe in Christ. They believe in Nestorius. That's why you're Nestorians.
So tell us a bit about Nestorians and Eutychians.
Yeah, so they're two sides of the same coin, which is, are they two sides of the same coin, or are they just one coin? Well, you'll understand that pathetic attempt at a joke in a second. But they're both about the two natures of Christ, which we talked about a little bit in a couple of our past episodes. So Nestorians, the mistake they make is that they separate, we say Christ has two natures, a divine nature and a human nature. They separate them almost to the point you could say that these are two guys who are at loggerheads here, the divine and the human nature. Which again, I think they don't come up with these out of anywhere. Like, you try explaining the Garden of Gethsemane without committing heresy. Good luck. Because it certainly seems like the divine and human wills are opposed to one another. Are you going to give the correction there? Or?
No. I mean, it seems like Nestorianism, especially, crazy glue Christology is how that was described in my.
Oh, that's great.
Say again?
That's great. Yeah, you're just these two pieces. They're not really the same thing. You're gluing them together, but yeah, everyone knows that this is fake.
Like a sandwich Christology almost, and it's more 50-50 than 100-100, right?
Oh, that's another great way of thinking of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so then Eutychianism is the opposite, which is it's taking Christology very seriously saying God became a human being, but so much so that the natures are kind of collapsed into one God-man, which again, it's not completely accurate. Like, Jesus Christ was not battling with himself all the time. Like, that's just that's bad humanity, not just bad divinity. It's bad Christology.
So then how does that lead us to the sacraments, Pastor James?
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. It comes down to, you could say, sorry, our cat's just got fed. You could say, like, how is this relevant for today? And I would say, oh, well, it is. And it concerns the sacrament of Holy Communion. So Lutherans believe that Christ, according to his promise, this is my body, is bodily present in the Eucharist. Again, I think we've talked about this before. It's different from how that happens for the Roman Catholics, but we do believe the body and blood are substantially present when we eat the Eucharist. Okay, and part of how they do that is Luther says that Christ has promised to be with us forever. Lo, I am with you always until the end of the age. And because Nestorius is an idiot, he can't simply divide the spirit and the body of Christ, the spirit and the divinity against the body of Christ. So wherever Christ's spirit goes, his body goes with him. You can't have kind of a schizophrenic Christ that's all split up like that. So that means if Christ says he'll be with us always and he can be with us wherever, and he has darn well said, I'm going to be here in his body, then he is. You may not understand how that happens, but that's because you're a sinful human being. You should trust his word, is what Luther might say to that. So what they do is there's a whole group of Reformed Christians, really starting with Calvin is kind of the big proponent of this, that at Eucharist, we receive Christ spiritually, and it's only through faith that we kind of eat of Christ's body in heaven. So you've got the Spirit comes down to us here and enables us to go eat the body in some way there. And that's Calvin, who's really closer to the real present side than just about any other Reformed. Most of them don't even, or many of them don't even go to the second step with him of eating Christ's body in heaven. This has the benefit of, it doesn't make you say things that are physically absurd, such as that Christ's body is in this grain of bread. But it does make you say things that are theologically absurd, such as Christ's spirit and Christ's body are in different places and you can have one without the other. So what it basically comes down to is the Reformed look at the Lutherans and they call them Eutychians. They're saying you are combining Christ's bodily or Christ's human and divine natures too much, and it's leading you to this manifest absurdity that Christ's body is present in this wafer you're eating like a cannibal. And if you weren't Eutychian, you would not be making this mistake. And Lutherans, we've never been quiet throughout the years, at least theologically, have we? So they shoot back across the bow and say that the Reformed tradition, the Calvinists are actually Nestorians because you are trying to make everything logically work out from your very mechanical, physical understanding, but you're dividing Christ in a way that he was not divided. Like the entire point of Jesus Christ is that you have the human and divine natures combined. And here at this critical moment of the sacrament, you're trying to divide them again. And they would say, that's a Nestorian mistake and it doesn't hold any water.
So I'm sorry, as you were finishing up there, something occurred to me. When we point at them and say, when Lutherans point at Calvinists and say, your sacrament's not valid because you don't believe the right thing, and when Calvinists point at Lutherans and say, your sacrament's not valid because you don't believe the right things, aren't both sides being Donatistic? No,
because the Lutherans, we believe that the sacrament is valid, but you may be taking it to your damnation. And see, that's where faith comes in. The sacrament's valid no matter what, but it might not be good for you. You know, just take bread as itself. It is bread, whether you believe it's bread or not. Um, if you have a gluten allergy, it might not be good for you. And that's kind of coming to the sacrament without faith. On the other hand, I think you could argue that the Reformed tradition would have to answer a little for Donatism. They believe that the sacrament's validity really does depend on the faith, that in order to eat bodily of Christ, that I have to have faith first, and that's how I get there. Otherwise, it's just bread. So that's another communion question, really, more than two natures of Christ. But I guess we are talking about Donatism today as well.
Well, it all sort of fits together, doesn't it?
Right. Right.
That's the way I framed the question. And I didn't mean to throw you under the bus there. We didn't talk about that in advance, but it literally occurred to me. Because as I said last week, I am an external processor.
Right. But I feel like I answered that one okay, at least. Hopefully our viewers will agree. Versus last week, there were several times. I don't know what was in the water last week when we were.
But neither of us was batting our A game. There's no doubt about that last week.
That's right.
Maybe it was your hat that really improved both of us for this week.
Right. More ahead. Just so fast.
And perhaps a note of explanation. We are coming upon the month of August means that both Pastor James and I may be less. I will definitely be less available, and Pastor James may be less available, though for very different reasons. And as a result, we may be recording farther in advance than usual for Theology Thursday. So it may be that you see Theology Thursday appear a little earlier than usual, and Pastor James probably won't have as much hat, and I probably won't have as much hair. So
I probably won't have as much hair either after the baby. You know who won't have as much hair? The baby.
Different reasons, though.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So yes, Pastor James and Pastor Nikki are having a baby, God willing, sometime a healthy baby, sometime in the month of August. And you know,
and maybe in order to really live out our values, we were going to have the baby baptized by the bishop, but because of COVID, that did not happen. Maybe we should pick the absolute worst pastor I think of to baptize the baby. And the baptism would still be valid. And if we had communion performed by that pastor later, it would still be valid.
It would. Although I don't know about going to intentionally to pick the worst pastor. And now that you've said that out loud, I'd be hesitant
if I asked you to do it.
Actually, I think Nikki and Rachel have already talked about that. So.
Did they?
I think so.
It feels like I should get a vote in this.
I'm not getting involved. Nope. I'm not getting involved. I just got to say yes. I do, and I ask God to help me at the appropriate time. So.
Right. And why is that?
Because it's in the liturgy, right?
Why is it in the liturgy?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't write the liturgy. Are you asking a more specific question like, what are you doing in the liturgy, Chris? Because Rachel and I are the godparents, yes. We are honored godparents.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. That wasn't really what I was going for, but it's important for the viewers to know. Like, because I think we said that we call it saving the sacraments from the magicians, or saving communion from the magicians. But I think you could say the same thing about baptism as well, which is the itself is valid no matter what. I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, water. You're good to go. But that promise is received by
faith.
Right. And so where do parents, godparents in the congregation play a role in that then? Are they just bystanders?
That's a fascinating question, Pastor James, in part because, we won't have much of a congregation. So you'll have to do the recognition of baptism another time, I guess. I hadn't thought about that till just now. But in the time of COVID, sacraments look a little different than they did pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
justice sacraments look a little different post the influenza of 1918. No, I mean, so the promises are important, but the promise of God does not rest on the promise that I make.
Exactly. I guess what I'm trying to say though is that the reason ideally we do baptism in community is that the sponsors, and by that I mean parents, godparents are more usual terms. Sponsor sounds big. That's why it is in the liturgy, not my fault. And the congregation that all make these vows, like you said, I do, and I ask God to help me. And yes, everyone in the congregation makes a promise at one point or another, by the way. What they're really doing is they're kind of on that side of receiving it by faith. How are we going to help this child to understand what promise God has just made to them, and to grow into that promise? Because it's like, a great example is if I give you a gift, okay? Donatists would say if I'm a bad guy that my gift doesn't count, it's not real. The church would say, well, of course he just gave him a gift. The box is frickin' right there. So the gift is valid no matter what. But if you just leave that gift there and never open it, it's not doing a whole lot. So that's why the received by faith side is important, because the gift is meant to be opened.
That's really interesting. So like, I remember years and years ago, Mother Teresa was attacked because she had taken blood money. Now, I never knew the specifics of that. I was 6 when she died. No, pardon me. I was in 6th grade when she died.
That's the age of accountability. No.
That doesn't necessarily mean I understood what was going on in the world in Calcutta.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I didn't really start following the news until late college, early seminary. Might have even been later than that. Anyway, at the same time, I want to acknowledge that, like, I mean, I've been public about this before. I didn't think my internship supervisor should have been a pastor, let alone an intern supervisor. And so, the things the gifts that he gave me in my own head, they have to have come from the congregation, or I would not want to use them. Does that make sense? Like, it's still a perfectly valid book. It's still a perfectly valid stupid little cloths. They can still be used, but I can understand the pain associated with gifts.
Oh, right. And to be clear, this was a metaphor. Like, honestly, the gift that is being given by Christ. And the problem is that we see that enacted because Christ does not usually just appear, in full first century garb. The gift is given on behalf of Christ by the pastor, but it's Christ doing the gift giving. And I think that's the Donatist hang up, really, is to like you said, there may be very good reasons for why we think that way, that, well, I can't accept it from this guy, but really what the Donatists are forgetting is the gift comes from Christ.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna leave and never go back to church again because I don't like the pastor. Sounds like Donatism to me. But as you and I were discussing after last week's episode, I may have picked up a parishioner or two from, I should say, Messiah Lutheran Church may have gained a parishioner or two from St. John's Lutheran Church. And I don't know the history. I don't need to know the history. But so I'm not going to say that I haven't been a positive recipient. And maybe, again, I'm an external processor, as I think I've said 8 times in the last 2 weeks. Maybe it's not so much Donatism, because at least they didn't stop attending worship. Right?
Exactly. I think that's another thing, is the church is bigger than one congregation.
Yeah. Well said. Well
It was
said.
not, to be fair though, on the other hand, that was not necessarily the case in North Africa. Like, it, there may have been one church in the community, and if that makes it a lot harder, because here you at least can go to Messiah, or you can go to St. John's if you're deeply hurt by the pastor or the congregation or what have you. Hopefully we all seek forgiveness and reconciliation first, but at least there is another option available. But you can't anachronistically imagine like St. Joseph County with our 100 churches or whatever, probably more than that, and say that it was like that in that time. It wasn't. There were one, maybe two games in town.
Yeah, maybe two, depending on the town.
Right. And if there were two, probably both of them thought each other were heretical. So.
Yeah. So the takeaway then is that the sacrament is based upon the promises of God, and not whether or not the pastor or priest is a good human being.
Right. I think you got it. I also think you and I should try to be good human beings that do not betray that trust as well.
I agree wholeheartedly. We should be true to our ordination vows.
Yeah, we're not trying to cop out here.
No. That's in case the bishop is listening, right?
Exactly, or anyone that just
anyone, yeah.
One of the charges is think of yourself as stewards of the mysteries of God, and mysteries is another word for sacraments, and that I think that involves, do you administer them faithfully, rightly understood, or are you going to be like the Donatists where you theologically don't understand well? But it also has implications for Christian living. If how I am behaving, how I am living my life, or how I'm treating other people is causing others to stumble, then I'm not living up to that ordination charge. Doesn't mean the sacrament's not valid, but it does mean that I've done a piss poor job of handling it.
Well, and we could say the same of the baptismal promises that the parents and sponsors and congregations make, right? The baptism is still valid, whether we live into those promises that we make or not. But we should still try to live into those promises.
Yeah. I think almost every problem can be made simpler, maybe not go away, but can be made simpler if we remember that it's up to Christ and not us.
Well said. And perhaps that's the place to end for this week.
That's right.
We look forward to seeing you again in a future edition of Theology Thursday, when we will talk about Pelagianism and antinomianism and how those are definitely still alive and well in the church today.
And that last quote will lead us right into the Pelagian problem. So just chew on that for a week.
Have a good one.
Have a great week, everyone.